Israel's options going forward in its war with Hezbollah is Miri. She's a retired IDF colonel and now director of the International Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University. Thanks so much for having you here.
Thank you so much for being here.
So there's a public discussion right now of Israel's options here, which you're familiar with. Could it be the nuclear sites, oil facilities, Iranian leadership? I wonder, is that an accurate presentation of how Israel is approaching this? That it has this kind of range from one more extreme end to something less extreme, for instance, not striking nuclear facilities. Is that a correct way to be looking at this?
Israel has been looking at those nuclear facilities for many years. This is not something new. I think already, almost a decade ago, this has been a real challenge for us. And when you have a challenge, you try to prepare yourself.
Right.
So that's certainly something that's going to be on the table. Israel is fighting a multi-front war. While this is going on, as you know, we've been attacking all of the different Hezbollah sites inside Lebanon. We continue to attack against different sites, Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And as we're talking, there are other proxies that have been attacking. I've heard of other attacks inside Syria and other places. So when you go out to do something like that, you have to also understand both the limits of your own force and the capabilities.
There is a understanding that Israel could not decisively strike Iran's nuclear facilities without U.S. military support. Is that accurate? Could it do it on its own, and might that depend on the extent of its objective in terms of those nuclear sites?
I wouldn't want Israel to do it on its own. That doesn't mean that we don't have the capability. Those are two different things. Israel is not a world power. We're certainly a regional power. At the end of the day, Iran going nuclear, or Iran attacking Israel the way that it has, this is not just a problem of Israel, it's a problem way beyond that. And in that sense, what I would like to see is certainly something that's done not just in coordination, but in cooperation, and not just with the United States. I really do think that this threat is something that we're belittling. Can you imagine what's going on right now if Iran was nuclear? It's a totally different world.
No question.
So I would like to hope to see it that way, but we do have the ability.
Would the Israeli leadership move forward? As you know, there's been some differences between U.S. and Israeli leadership over the course of the war for the last several months. If the U.S. were to say no, might Israel go forward over U.S. objections? Even if it prefers U.S. participation or cooperation or approval, if it didn't get it, might it make its own decision to do so?
Jake, we're sitting here right now in Tel Aviv. That's what the backdrop is behind. I think that you view things differently when you're here. When it's an existential threat, you do things also on your own. Did anybody in the world expect Israel to be the one to defend off in its own way Hamas with that colossal failure at the beginning? Hezbollah, which is a problem not just for Israel, but much further than that, for us to go against both the Houthis in Yemen and other sites. Here we are taking care of all of these different Islamic regime of Iran's proxies. And so now that big question is, will Israel go at it alone? I don't want to, but that is an existential threat. And it's not just Hezbollah or Hamas, it's also Iran.
Is it possible that Israel might carry out military action and the world wouldn't know against sensitive Iranian sites? Iran might know, but perhaps Iran wouldn't want to advertise that.
Well, that would be the sort of thing that we'll be able to talk afterwards and see what comes out. I think it's easier to do something covert against a country like Iran, which at the end of the day today is an Islamic regime. It's a dictatorship. If you do something there that they don't want anybody to know, perhaps they could keep it under wraps. There is an opposition. Things do come out at the end. That's also, by the way, something that you can do which lowers the tones. You do something, they know it, you know it, but you don't necessarily get to an open clash.
Let's talk now about operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon, because they're clearly expanding the number of airstrikes we saw just today in Beirut, but also ground operations. And those ground operations have already proven deadly. And I was here in 2006, and there are some echoes in my own mind of how deadly that operation was with an uncertain outcome. Can you describe Israel's objective in Lebanon now? Does it intend to push Hezbollah all the way back to the Litani River and if need be, occupy that area?
We never want to occupy Lebanon, even when we occupied it in those 18 years. It's not like we sat there in a military presence. What Israel wants to do right now is, I would say, continue what has been put out in the last 48 hours, is that the IDF over 200 days was acting in that southern Lebanese area right adjacent to the border to expose and go into the underground subterranean arena, which is tunnels just like under the Gaza Strip, and also into the towns and villages where Hezbollah built a force like the Nukhba, Hamas, October 7th attack, and they had all of the cache of weapons, the subterranean. They were going in to take care of that. There's a lot of footage about that. What the IDF is doing now is getting to the places that you can't just get to in that very covert operations that were taking place over the last several months. And I think in that sense, when we talk about limited in scope, limited in time, limited in the capabilities, you build your force to be able to respond. But in the day, right now, what they're doing is against those Hezbollah, mainly the Radwan forces that are right along the border.
Before we go, there's an enormous amount of anticipation now about Israel's next step. And I'm not going to hold you to this, and of course, decisions being made outside of our own purview. But do you expect an Israeli response to the Iranian attack in the next several days?
I expect an Israeli response. I cannot say if it'll be in the next several days. We're in the middle of the Jewish New Year.
Yeah.
And I say that's also, people are in synagogues and otherwise. When you attack something, you cannot always know how they're going to respond. That's going to be part of the idea. I absolutely think that we will do something. Don't know if it'll be overt or covert, but when we do so, I do think that people will know.
All right, Miri, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate your
so
analysis. And we